Well, let's just continue this issue around coalitions. You saw what happened last week in the city of Joburg. The Speaker, Vasco da Gama, was voted out. It turns out that within that, 2 of the 3 ACDP councillors, 1 IFP councillor, and it seems Cope's councillor, voted against da Gama, despite the fact those parties are part of the DA-led coalition in Joburg. Professor Dirk Kotze is a professor of politics at UNISA. Professor Kotze, good afternoon to you. The ANC and the EFF both claim that they're now going to be able to remove the mayor of Joburg and Paul Palatse. The smaller opposition parties want to do that. We have this claim around what happened last week and who voted for who and why. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think possibly the opposite, and that is that the coalition group have reconstituted themselves or reclaimed their position by having all the meetings that's provided in their coalition agreement, like, for example, the management committee and the oversight body that includes the party leaders. And I think what is significant is your introduction by saying that it is not the IFP per se that voted together with the DA, with the ANC and with the EFF, but only one of their 7 members, and the same with the ACDP. And at the same time, these parties also indicated that they are going to act against these members. So there is not unanimity amongst the parties or the members who supported the motion of no confidence together with the ANC and the EFF. So my expectation is that, first of all, there will most possibly not ultimately be a motion of no confidence in the Johannesburg mayor, or if they continue, that it will not be successful because these parties would have consolidated their members. And secondly, that the DA will most possibly continue to keep the position of the Speaker, but most possibly then with a different person. And I think what is significant about this latter point is that it is now occupied by a person from Cope, which is in line with the changes that were also made in Tshwane. Because initially the 3 top positions, the executive mayor, the speaker, as well as the chief whip, in both cases, were occupied by DA members. And I was part of a group that actually had a discussion with the Johannesburg mayor of saying, but you are actually making a mistake. This is not the spirit of a coalition government. There must be more sharing of power. So I think they are in the process also learning about from their mistakes.
You talk to the point, the coalition agreement. And in a way, this is a massive test, I would think. If you're in a coalition agreement with someone and a representative of that party betrays you, I suppose is what they'll argue, now that party has to prove that they can be trusted. How hard is that to do?
That is indeed difficult because the agreement, the document itself, and for each of the metros there's a general document and then a specific one also. There they specify which party can get which positions, and that goes down to the positions of the Section 94 committee chairpersons, the chairperson of chairpersons, and several other positions. So it's not only the mayoral committee as well as the top 3. And if a party is not anymore or cannot be trusted anymore, then this whole arrangement is built on a soft foundation. And I think this is what will be difficult for the small parties to be able to rectify, to build that trust again, because the DA and maybe some of the Action SA and some of the other bigger parties will now look twice at that support and maybe make sure when they appoint persons again in positions that they are not necessarily going to identify persons whose trust they cannot rely on. So it is a major challenge for the smaller parties. And I think, again, this is where councils like, for example, Tshwane and Johannesburg and even Ekurhuleni, where it is problematic is the fact that their majorities are so slim. In the case of Tshwane, it is only 1 seat. In the case of Johannesburg, it is, I think, 3 or 4 seats. So there's a very small margin to work with. And therefore, indeed, small parties can make a difference, and that is why they are playing such an important role in these coalitions.
In the ACDP, 2 councillors in Joburg voted for the motion to remove da Gama. So, as I understand it, is what the leader of the ACDP, the Reverend Kenneth Meshwer, has said. They voted against instructions. and one councillor of the ACDP voted with their instructions to retain da Gama. So now, what happens to these three people? I mean, when two people break the rule of their own party, why would they do that? Could this even be the end of the ACDP? I mean, can it really be a cohesive political party if two councillors do one thing and one party does another?
Yes, that put them under tremendous pressure, and I think this is where this, at the moment, allegation about possible bribery comes in, is that what has happened is that individuals were targeted. The fact that we see it's not a party as a whole that voted in a particular way, but that these individuals, that means that there has been some intervention at the individual level in order to make them to vote for the ANC and the EFF's motion. And I think that again is about the credibility of a party per se. We are seeing, last week was also the almost spectacle about COPE. And it is smaller parties sometimes tend to become involved in this sort of more personalized politics because there's so few options for them, opportunities, that whatever is there, they are going to optimize it as much as possible and then for their personal use. And I think this is one of the main concerns, but main problems of really small parties is that they cannot really function as a party anymore. It's a few individuals that makes up this party. And then these things become possible, this type of almost rogue behavior, if one can put it in strong terms.
Can we talk for a minute about COPE and their representative in Joburg, Councillor Makabele? Because her party essentially has fallen apart. We saw that fist fight last week in front of our screens at a press conference. So I don't know if there's anyone in COPE who can call her to account, which means, as I would understand it, she can probably do whatever she wants. I don't know if she's accountable to anyone. Now, if, as you point out, the balance of power is so tight, she's in quite an interesting position, isn't she?
Indeed so. And I think this is possibly why they've put her in this position as Speaker. Because the effect of that is to bind her into the arrangements of the coalition. There's now more at stake for her than merely voting for the opposition. And I think that it's obviously following the example of Tshwane, where COPE has also now the position of the Speaker. But at the same time, those that cannot be controlled in a political sense, if you give them a position which is something where there's an interest involved for them, then automatically you bind them into an arrangement. But if there are members without positions, and I think this is the problem with the allocation of seats and responsibilities in both in Tshwane and Johannesburg, is that these small parties did not receive much responsibilities as either a chairperson of a Section 79 committee or so on. So they have less to lose than the persons who are in more important positions. It's a fact of life. It is. Many people look at it nowadays in terms of their interest and what they will lose if they take a particular decision.
We saw what happened in Nelson Mandela Bay during the last before the elections in November, the local elections. We saw power going back and forth a little bit. We saw horse trading. The Patriotic Alliance there held the balance of power and they moved back and forth a little bit. Could the same now happen in Joburg? Could we have another metro that is governed in the same way? Because there are lots of things that happen. It's not just that power changes hands. It's that to stay in power, people have to reach agreements with people, and that's where things get a bit complicated for governance.
That is so, and we should remember that the coalition in the case of Johannesburg consists of 9 parties. So it's the biggest coalition that we have had at local government level up to now. The other one was in 2006 in Cape Town when Alan Zille's coalition consisted of 6 parties. Now in Tshwane it's also 6 and now 7 parties with the Patriotic Alliance who joined them. So it is very clumsy, overloaded coalitions to a large extent. But it is something which is possibly the Johannesburg mayor said it to me that most of her time she spends now on managing the coalition. So it is an absolutely daunting task to keep all of them together and to create, as I said, interest that bring them together, that they ultimately have an interest in in participating and simply don't see it as just a form of cooperation. So for whether it is in Nelson Mandela Bay, which is in itself now becoming a target of another motion of no confidence, maybe even this week. And ironically, it now comes from the opposite side. It comes from the DA side. So the use of motions of no confidence have become such a general instrument that's being used that I personally start to reconsider the use of motions of no confidence in general. That becomes the easiest way of removing either individual, strategic individual persons like a mayor or a speaker, or the government as a whole, and change the government. And I think we will have to reconsider, because it has become almost an opportunistic instrument that's being used, quite similar to the floor crossing that we had in the past. And incidentally, a lot of the dynamics of the floor crossing we start to see now becoming involved in the motion of no confidence also.
Professor, I don't often get to break what I think is good news to political analysts, but here's a rare chance for me to do it. You'll have seen the breaking news on the screen as well, that the petrol price is going to come down by over R2 a litre. That'll be overnight tomorrow night at midnight, from midnight tomorrow. The fuel price, so the petrol price coming down by over R2 a litre. The diesel price, depending on which diesel you use, by between 40 cents and 60 cents a litre. Professor, I know you study politics, but it seems to me that here and around the world, fuel is becoming a burning political issue. This will take at least some of the pressure off government over fuel prices for a while.
Yes, indeed so. And I think it's good news for all of us. It's good news for persons who are using taxis or buses. It's good news for persons who are traveling long distances to go to work. It's good news for trucks and for the heavy industry businesses also, because a lot of our transport nowadays is not by rail anymore, and I've done it myself lately, but if you go on any of the major roads of South Africa, it is completely congested by these big trucks. So our economy is more and more dependent on a fuel-driven type of transport, and I think for the economy, but also for we as residents and citizens, it's an absolutely good news.
There has been a lot of push for reform to change the fuel price formula. When the price goes up, there are always these calls, let's change the way we do the fuel price. When the price goes down, everyone forgets about it. Are we missing a tick here? Do we need to actually make some sort of change and stick with the change?
Well, I think, no, this is not my idea, but a major component of the petrol price obviously consists of levies and indirect forms of taxes. So it means it's not at all related to the value of the rand or the exchange rate of the rand or the price of crude oil. And I think this is something which has become, politically speaking, first for government, an easy way of adding additional taxes without announcing it as a tax. So there is not the same type of emotional response against it. And it is to a large extent hidden within the broader price of fuel. But at the same time, it is also a way in which that it's an indication to what extent the government is running out of options in terms of revenue. And it is also an indication that the normal economic activities and whether it is commercial tax or personal income tax or other forms of tax simply does not serve the purpose anymore to provide the government with sufficient fiscal resources. So it is a reflection on the government and its way of, with the economy in general.
Professor Dirk Kotze, really appreciate the time. Thank you, Professor of Politics at UNISA.